All right, we're going to continue our discussion of Mary Midgley's article on moral isolationism. And in this one, I want to compare moral isolationism with a slightly different view called cultural relativism. Now, to review, here's what the moral isolationist wants to say. The moral isolationist thinks that there might be objective moral facts about other cultures. However, the isolationist thinks that we can never know what those facts are because we're in no position to make judgments about the moral code of another culture. We just don't know enough about them. Now, Midgley rejects that view. She thinks moral isolation is totally wrong. My point here is just to say that the isolationists may or may not believe that there are objective moral facts. They just want to deny that we are in a position to know them when it comes to other cultures. So that's similar to, but different from one of the most popular forms of anti-realism. And that form of anti-realism is called cultural relativism. Now, according to cultural relativism, right and wrong are relative to each culture. That is, right and wrong, good and bad are just whatever a given culture approves of. If your culture approves of monogamy and disapproves of polygamy, then monogamy is right in your culture and polygamy is wrong. If your culture approves the opposite, then the opposite's right and wrong in your culture. If your culture approves of all kinds of liaisons and relationships, then all kinds of liaisons and relationships are morally right. It's all up to your culture. So you can see how this is a form of anti-realism, because if what's right and wrong just depend on what we happen to think about it, then there's no objective facts out there to know. Now, why am I bringing this up in relationship to moral isolationism? Because similar motivations lead people to adopt moral isolationism and cultural relativism. They can be attractive for very similar reasons. So let me explain why cultural relativism can seem so compelling. It seems like cultural relativism makes sense out of the different moral codes of other cultures. It seems obvious, that is, that different cultures have different moral codes that they hold to. And it seems like this theory makes, it's got an obvious way of showing why that is. Morality is like taste. Some people like spicy foods, some people don't. Some cultures like that kind of cuisine, some don't. So if morality is like taste, that makes good sense of why it would vary from culture to culture. Furthermore, it seems like cultural relativism allows us to be tolerant of other cultures. Well, why is that? Because nobody can make a claim that another culture is wrong in their morality. And no culture is superior in its moral code to another. It's not like, oh, cultures that believe in polygamy are backwards and cultures that believe in monogamy are correct. Nah, everybody's correct in their own little sphere and nobody is subjectively wrong. So that seems like a very tolerant attitude. And furthermore, it seems to give us a basis for a common moral code within our culture. How can we figure out what's right or wrong? Well, what do we all agree on? Whatever our culture approves or disapproves, it's not even exactly majority rule. It's just whatever is overall culturally approved and disapproved. That may involve the majority or it may not. All right, so I hope you can feel the mojo of why cultural relativism feels so attractive, and in fact, probably feels very natural and intuitive to many of us in contemporary America. However, there are a lot of worries that philosophers might have about cultural relativism, objections they might raise. Let me just list a few. If cultural relativism is true, then anyone who disagrees with their own culture's moral code is automatically wrong. So look, let's say you're in antebellum Southern culture. Antebellum Southern culture is pro-slavery. Well, that means if you try to be a moral reformer and suggest that slavery maybe actually is wrong, you're automatically wrong because your culture disagrees with you, and disagreeing with your culture is always automatically wrong. Next, if cultural relativism is true, then if your culture approves of intolerance and racism, that makes it right. That makes intolerance and racism morally right in societies that approve of them. That's kind of a tough bullet to bite for many people. Furthermore, each of us is a member of many different societies, and these different cultures that we belong to sometimes have contradictory moral codes. For example, maybe you're part of, I don't know, but maybe you're part of a bowling culture. And the bowling culture, your bowling team, nobody's on bowling teams anymore, but imagine they were. Maybe your bowling team is a strictly non-alcoholic bowling team. Their culture is we bowl better when we don't drink, right? So that's one code that you're bound by because that's your culture. On the other hand, maybe you're also a Baptist, and maybe Baptists really love to drink. I'm kind of switching things up on you. But let's say, so you're both, you're a bowler and you're a Baptist. Which rule are you supposed to follow? Both are true for you because your culture endorses these contradictory rules. It seems like you're in a logically impossible situation there. Next, it seems like cultural relativism gives us no way of settling disputes between conflicting societies, right? Maybe, you're one culture, in one country, you can split cultures up by countries. It's not quite that simple, but maybe one culture in one country believes in, executing all the foreigners because, you got to keep the blood and soil pure or something like that. But the next door neighbor believes in the next door neighbor culture believes that, like, no, you should intervene and save the sojourners and the foreigners in your country, and well, now who's right and who's wrong? What's the right thing to do? That neither country can criticize the others. Neither culture can criticize the others because they're both right, because everybody's own views are right, even though they're contradictory. There's no higher code or standard to appeal to beyond those individual cultures. So it seems like, man, we're just locked into disagreement here. And then finally, cultural relativism seems to make it impossible to learn from the moral views of other cultures. Why? Because they may be right for them, but they have nothing to teach you. Your own culture is already automatically infallible. Everything your culture teaches is true. So why do you need to listen to the critiques of others? All right. Those are kind of some possibly unattractive consequences of cultural relativism that might make you rethink it. Now, let's return to the comparison between isolationism and relativism. Both of them seem like they are respecting the moral codes of other cultures, but as a matter of fact, they have very different implications than you might at first have assumed. Some people, however, want to take isolationism or relativism one step farther. They want to say, wait a minute, not only is it wrong to ever criticize another culture, it's wrong to ever criticize another individual, either because I can never understand you well enough or because whatever you happen to think is automatically right. Everybody has their own truth and you can't ever gainsay it. Well, if you take it to the individual level, most of the same objections that we've raised about cultural isolationism and relativism are also going to apply at the level of individuals. Now, all this is not to say that these views are necessarily, maybe there's good answers to these objections. Maybe we should just bite the bullet and accept the consequences that they have. The point that I want to show is these views have perhaps very different implications than you might at first have expected.